Hello, all. Welcome to lesson 14 of the Rook Endgames series. This one is going to talk about the cutoff of the enemy king by 3 files. As we see over here, the king is cut off from the pawn by 3 files. We have again the most uncomfortable knight pawn. Well, not the most because the rook pawn is even worse. But on the previous lesson, we saw this cutoff being just by 2 files, and we saw that we were not able to win. Here, the situation differs in white favor, of course. The pawn is still on the fourth rank. We already know that we want to advance it across the middle of the board so we can win. And here, the technique is very simple. We simply bring the king. Now, of course, black will try the defensive frontal attacks, but okay, I am ready for them. And here, normally the defense goes attacking the pawn instead of checking and allowing my king to approach even in a more dangerous situation. So here, the best is to attack the unprotected pawn. Of course, this position is ideal. I could check, move the king away, and then come back to protect the pawn. But here I want to show you what happens if I go directly, because this is also working, and not always I will have the enemy king in the perfect position. So I also need to understand how to do it with this. Of course, here the king will try to go in front. Is searching for a philidor position, a defensive drawing philidor position. But of course, that doesn't matter. It doesn't goes on time. I simply cross the middle of the board with a pawn. The king goes to e7. I bring the king, and as you can see, there's not much black can do. Here I have several ways to win. Let's just advance the pawn. If the rook tries to check me, I go to b7, and next move I will just check the king. The king will move away. I have a winning Luciana position. So let's say, for example, over here, the rook comes here. I check it. It goes out. I can simply advance the pawn until this position. Then the rook comes, and then this is just the winning. Now I will maneuver, and then the rook will protect, building the bridge, and so on. Scipione Luciana position. If you haven't, just review it. Maybe coming to the king in front creates more difficult, but every time you see this, then you think on things like this one. And now we are threatening checkmate. It's not anymore a problem for white to win this one, because we are going to win the rook. So this was the first easy way. We go just to the front, then we come back and protect the pawn and help it advance. Things are not going to be always this. Let's see what happens if the king is in a different position, is in f6. Okay, it changes a bit, but not that much. So we again bring the king. Now we are harassed by the rook. And when we reach here, instead of coming back with the rook, we just protect it with the king, so forcing black to use another harassment check. But now, when I reach this position again, I am playing against the position of the king. I am always looking to this perfect solution. Now I will abuse. I will just check it, move it away before coming back. Now the rook tries to block the pawn, but the king is very close, so we move the rook away. And now, as you can see, there is no way the black rook is going to be able to save this one. So next move, we just move the king maybe for a8 and then promote the pawn. So as you can see, we are dealing with a much easier situation as soon as the rook is cutting off the enemy king by 3 files. Let's move on to another position. So here I'm making things a bit harder. I am using the same starting position we saw before, but the pawn is one behind. What happens over here? Well, here there is a special detail, that is the position of the king. So here is not the best position for the defense. The best position is to have the king on f6. We are going to see why. But for the moment, we use the same technique. So we bring our king. We are going to be harassed. Of course, we are going to try to move here because the rook is a bit more far away than before, we can check it. But if we go back, we simply use the same thing. We are going to reach this position where we are facing the king in perfect opposition. But let's go with the direct first check, then the rook approach. Now I can go to d6 instead of d5, so I am approaching even more. And now I go to this position, not this one, because of course the rook then can come cut me again, and I'm not interested on that. So here is the best situation because I am more or less in the same distance. Either the rook comes in front, or I am attacked with the pawn. So let's say now black tries, let's say, attack the pawn. Okay, let's see first check. Now I can go and be perfect on this situation. Of course the rook is threatening a bit of the trick, so here I don't advance the pawn. Of course I first attack the rook, and when the rook moves away I advance the pawn, and now I am in a very easy winning situation because the king is still cut off by three files, and I am already advancing the pawn. So it's going to be easy. As you see now, what is the move? Yes, I bring the rook and then I help the pawn advance, and as you can see, there's nothing uh, black can do. But here I saw the check. Let's see what happens if the rook attacks the pawn. If it attacks the pawn, well, I need to protect the pawn, and again I bring the rook because the enemy king is not in a good position. So here I attack the rook again, and now I advance the pawn, and as you can see, there's no way we are going to reach the winning Luciano position, and this is an easy win for white, of course. Now let's move on for the same situation, but where the king moves to f6. So this is the perfect situation for the defense. The rook is in front of the pawn, and the king is in the perfect situation. This is, of course, with the third rank pawn. With the fourth rank pawn, things wouldn't matter, as we saw. But now things are a bit difficult. Let's say we go with the most natural techniques that we learned until now. So let's say we start with the king coming to c3. Now the rook checks our king. We go to d4. The rook comes back attacking the pawn. Of course, it's too soon to bring the rook, so I go with the king. I suffer another check. I will place the king on d5, and now the rook comes back. And so here I got the same situation. I need to protect the pawn, and I have two solutions. Either come back with the king, which is not, of course, the ideal for a progression, or I use the rook. If I use the rook, then I can protect from the side or from the back. Let's see what happens if I protect, let's say, from the side. If I protect from the side, well, the king just comes to f5. Now I need to start to be very, very careful because this seems like easy positions, but they aren't. Let's say, for example, I go and check the king. So yes, let's every time I can, I want to move the king away. Yes, bye bye. Because now the king simply attacked our rook. The rook comes to c3, and of course now there's no way black can progress because there's too much difference. I can't advance the pawn. If I come back, the king's approaches. Notice that there are not anymore three files apart. This is going to be a disaster. This is going simply to be an easy draw for black. So when we reach this position, we already need to be careful. And the correct move is to go with the king coming back to the same position. So suddenly we saw that we need to start back on the beginning. So as you can see, we are basically forced to the same position, and we are exactly on the starting position. Uh, okay, so without this being available for us, let's see what happens with the other one. We are still winning. Even with the rook e3, we were winning. But of course, you saw that we needed to come back to the starting position and do it all again. That's why this is not so easy with an enemy king on the f6 square and our pawn, of course, on the b3 one. Now the king starts to go ahead to go to the Philidor position. So I am forced to go with the king to c6. Let's see what happens if I blunder with the mistake of advancing the pawn. Well, now the king can go in front, and as you can see, very easily, if I check it, there's no problem. This is a Philidor position, and black is drawing from here. So not also a good situation. So I can't advance the pawn. I really need to stop the king to have a very comfortable situation. But now what happens is the rook comes to b4, and I'm going to be with really hard times to progress unless I know also this technique, which is not the purpose here. I am just showing you the options. And so if I attack the rook, what happens? Well, the rook comes back. I get the same situation, so I need to control the king approaching to a filled out position. So I need to go back, and then the rook comes back, and no progression, no way to work from here. What else? Well, if I can't do that, well, let's see what happens if I go with, let's say, king c7. Well, this is kind of strange, okay, but this is also possible. Well, here the king comes to e6, which forces me to go back to c6, and then the king comes back, and again, no progressions. As you can see, we are starting to have some troubles over here. So the technique here, if you reach this very uncomfortable position anytime, you need to remember this one. We deliver check. Normally the king tries to go next to the filled position, and then we move to the defensive side protection of the pawn. Why this is working? Because at the same time, if the king goes again to there, I can checkmate it. So this forces more or less the rook to come to h4. And again, I need to know how to progress because stupid moves like, for example, going to c3, this just allows the king to approach the Philidor position, and from here I can't win anymore. Not only the defensive side checks are working, as at the end I will be facing draw Philidor position, so not working from here. So here I need to realize the following. I need to play against the option of not allowing the king going to c8. So I need to keep the threat of the checkmate. And there's always only two options. Either I stay in one of these two squares or I go ahead. If I go ahead, well, what happens here is the rook comes back attacking the pawn, forces me to protect it. So any other move that I make that it's not going to be in these two squares, the rook simply go to b4 and I am done, and I need to come back. So we need to go. This is more or less the best because it gives more separation for the enemy king. And so here I am threatening to go along the files to protect the pawn. So how will this happen? How will this develop? Let's see first this situation. If the king comes back, I check it, and the king comes back again to the position. And here, don't blunder, okay? Don't play this move because this is a blunder. This is just allowing the king to reach the Philidor position, as you can see, and it's again a draw. So pay attention. If the king comes back, we need to check it again. And when it is more far away from the front of the file of the pawn, then we come back and then we protect the pawn. And of course, here there's not much more that black can do to avoid the loss. Of course, these are not very easy techniques, but we need to go and learn. Now the other option is the rook to come back in front of the pawn, but now it's different. I can simply check the king first, then check it again, and because the rook is on the b4, I can play this move without the option of the king coming back because I will just grab the rook. This forces the rook to move away, so the rook comes back to a4, and now I check the king again, forcing it to move away, and now I advance the pawn. And I am getting ready for a winning Lucena position. Not so easy because our rook is not in the perfect situation. If I got checked, then I need to also maneuver a bit, okay? But after a while, as you can see, the king can't go to b8, and then I am able to force it to leave. And as you can see, we are heading to a winning Scipione Lucena position. So this one was the situation where the king is on f6, and I go with a normal maneuver. Let's see what happens if we have the same situation, but now with a different technique. Because the king and rook are in a perfect situation, my suggestion is for you to try this move. This is a waiting move. And now let's see what happens if the king comes to f5. Well, I play this just exactly like the first time was white to play. So it's the same technique. It's working because there is a difference having the king on f6 or f5. We are going to see it. So I protect the pawn again, I suffer the check. Now I place my king on d5, and when the rook attacks, I simply first check the king moves away one file, and then I can come back to help the pawn. And because the king is one move away from the previous position, I am able to use that move for what? To advance the pawn. And now, of course, this is a winning position we saw before. Don't need to stay here watching it out. Uh, we can review it in the previous one. So over here, okay. So over here, the king coming to f5, I play this with the normal situation. If the king goes to f7, well, the idea is I want to advance the pawn at least for the fourth rank. So what I use is this kind of maneuver. I use my rook. Now let's say, for example, the king comes back. I come with my king. So the idea is to support the pawn with both pieces. If the king attacks the rook, this won't help anymore because I can simply come back and notice that this is like if I am starting the position with my king to c3. Remember that we were winning over here because the king was not on f6. And so, as we saw before, this is winning. So here, the only option for black is to go with the harassment frontal check. But now I use the king to approach. Okay, we are being attacked, then go again. Again, if the rook is attacked, I simply come back and the improved position is enough. Let's see from here. So I just go with the approaching of the king. Notice that now I need to protect the pawn. So the usual maneuver will come. So I go back, then the rook tries to block it. But of course, now it's very easy to win from here. So as you saw, uh, this was not also working. But there's a defense over here that you should also memorize, which is to just move the rook one square in front of the pawn. Because notice that because the pawn is still on the third rank, we still have enough space to work with the rook from here. So we are not going to be harassed by the enemy king just because we move one move forward. But this is not easy, okay? Normally, the players tend to move again the king, and this is only normally for experienced players. So the trying to trick over here, well, we need also to be smarter. We need to bring the king. This is not going to be that easy. We are going to suffer the normal checks. So here we need to protect the pawn, and we are already starting to face some problems. If we go, for example, with the king c4, then the rook just checks it again. But now I am not able to improve much from the previous position. If you remember over here, we were in the same situation. If I attack the rook, sorry, the rook just comes back. If I attack it back, if I come back to forbid the king to come over the Philidor position, the rook just comes back again. If I go over here, the king goes here. Then I need to force to come to c6. The king comes to e7. I need to go back again, and so on. And I can't improve. But of course, if I use the same technique we saw before, this is also winning, but not the ideal situation. So over here, I prefer to teach you over here. Well, I am lost a bit. Okay, over here. Over here, where the rook comes back to attack the pawn, I prefer to use this defensive move, rook e3, because at the same time we are protecting the pawn. The king is already more advanced to help, and we are cutting the king. This is going to be fun because the idea is I want first to create separation for the enemy king. So I want to move the king away one plus square, one plus five for the side. And only after I will come back, set up the position, and then use the normal technique. Let's see this in action. So the rook goes to the starting position. So I go with the king, threatening to play before the rook arrests my king. I come back to d6. Of course, the rook don't want to check me on d8, because otherwise I will simply attack the rook. And now when the rook comes back to try to harass my pawn, I simply bring my king. And so there's no time for black to avoid the advancing of the pawn, and here I am winning. Uh, so over here, the rook needs to attack the pawn again. And because it attacks the pawn again, I can use this maneuver of moving the king away one more square and then come back with the king. Notice how I am working. First, I went over here to force the king to move away, and now I will need to come back to reset up everything. So now the maneuver is to coming back to almost the starting position, but with 4 files. Okay, so this is a different technique from the one we saw before to win this one. And let's see this in action. This is easier to remember. So I come back, okay, and now, as you can see, I am in the starting position, and there's no chance for black king to come back to f6. And from here, whatever black does, I simply go and work the same way up again. And from here, I just protect the pawn. The king won't come in time. Notice that now the pawn is already advanced, and so we are in the winning position that we saw before. Maybe this is a bit harder to understand, but if you progress from the first positions until the last one, until this one, and for this one, this is the hardest one, because black is in the perfect defensive situation. Notice that this is very key, the position of the king at the f7 square, f6 square, sorry. Uh, from here, we already understood that one technique is to bring the king in front of the other king, checking it in a way, forcing, and then coming back and progress. The other was more complicated, coming to the side defensive of the pawn, then moving to threats with checkmate and so on, and then come back in front of the pawn and work from there. So not easy, but that's why we love Rook Endgames, because if all were experts on this one, no one could win them. Okay? Have fun, and I see you in future lessons. Bye bye.